and welcome back to another of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, and today is Tuesday, February 18th, and we're here today in the studio with Michael Nawrath, who is one of the two candidates who's running for the moderator position in the town of Manchester. This year there's a competitive race for that. John O'Keefe, the former town manager, is also running, and in the second half of this program we'll hear from John, but we're really pleased to be joined today here in the studio by Mike Nawrath, who has been the moderator for the Manchester town meetings since a long time, Mike, right? 20-something years, I think?
20-some years, right?
Oh, but who's counting, right?
Right.
Well, anyway, thanks an awful lot for making the time to come down and just talk a little bit about you know, what the job of moderator involves, and you know, maybe where do we see things going in town meetings of the future. But I guess just to get started, can you tell us what you see as what the primary job of the moderator is, or the primary role? Is it mainly to moderate the town meeting, or more to it than that?
Well, by law, the job of the moderator is to maintain order and also to keep the voters on task. And the agenda is really established by the select board when they publish the warning. There's typically an article at the end that says any other business proper to come before the meeting. That doesn't mean that you can take binding action on anything that hasn't been warned previously. So I have to always be on the lookout for that. I would say the moderator is one of the most intense jobs there are in town government, but for a very short period of time, one day a year typically.
I mean, occasionally there are special town meetings and you'd have to moderate those as
right.
well.
But those are few and far between. So it is a one-day job. There's no budget that I have. There's no salary that I have. There's trying to give the voters their rights that they're guaranteed by law and the Constitution to speak up, and this is their one time of year that they can do that, and one time of year when they can take action which must be followed by the select board in the coming year. So it's not an annual meeting of the select board, it's an annual meeting of the voters at which the select board determines the agenda, but otherwise they don't run the meeting.
So what's the most challenging part of the job? Is it keeping order, as you say, or making sure everyone gets an equal opportunity to speak, or what's the hardest part of it?
The hardest part is to be sure that people in their speaking are staying within the bounds of what we can talk about. We can't attack personalities. It's a contest of ideas, not of people. And also being aware that if someone makes an amendment, it must be germane to the topic that you're talking about and all the implications of that. So that's the hardest part. There's physical part of keeping track of who's spoken for how long, because you're only allowed 10 minutes under Robert's rules.
So that's each individual person is only 10 minutes all told over the course?
On one question.
On one question, okay.
So there might be Article 3, and they could speak 10 minutes on Article 3, and then there might be an amendment to Article 3. They've got another 10 minutes then. So I keep a little scorecard during the meeting and always watching the clock, and at the same time, out of one ear, trying to keep track of what's going on. And of course, if there are amendments, keeping track of which vote, what's the question on the floor at the time. And that's actually where I've encountered the most problems over the years is there will be a main question, and then there will be an amendment, and we're talking about the amendment, and people then want to go back and talk about the main question, but we can't do that until we dispense with the amendment first. And Oliver Levis and I got into it a bit one year over that.
You know, another thing I've noticed at some town meetings, there's a paper ballot called for, I guess.
Right.
There's probably a close voice vote or whatever. Right? Mm-hmm. How do you determine whether or not a paper ballot is called for? Because that's a real time-consuming process, isn't it?
It is. We've taken some measures to try to make it more efficient, but it takes about 20 minutes in Manchester's case, depending on how many people are present, in order to do that. So I can't determine myself whether a paper ballot is necessary or appropriate. Any voter can request it, and there have to be 6 other people who support that. And that's a provision of Vermont law, so that if 7 people want a paper ballot, there will be a paper ballot.
No ifs, ands, or buts, huh?
We took some measures a few years ago. Unfortunately, we have new voting machines now that are not programmed to do that. But we had a programmed blank ballot that had a yes or no, so that if we did have a paper ballot, we could, in short order, pass out those ballots, check off people as they go through, and have the machine tabulate the result. Unfortunately, as I said, we don't have the program anymore for the machines that we have now, but that's something I would suggest to the select board would be a good idea for the future.
So you've moderated now, as we were saying, over 20 town meetings, and I'm sure you attended them before that, and you've been
I did, yeah.
gone to a whole bunch, and I'm sure, like me, you're of a certain age where you can remember back to a time when town meeting was a very well attended event. Seemed like a lot of, hundreds of people would show up. And more recently, it seems to me, and I realize we've had a bit of a pandemic in the last few years, so that's changed things around a little bit, but it did seem like in the past, 10 or so years, the attendance began to kind of gradually diminish a little bit. And that's not just the case in Manchester alone. I mean, I think that's kind of across the board. And I've read several articles and books about town meeting, and one of the themes seems to be, how do we get town meeting back to being the main event that it was 50, 60, 100, 200 years ago? Times have changed. It's a different world from 200 or so years ago. But have you had any thoughts on what might be done to kind of, get more people, encourage more people to come to the meeting?
Well, Professor Frank Bryan from UVM, who's the world authority on town meetings, says that if you want to increase your attendance, the single best thing you can do is have a controversial question on the warning. And of course, that's contrary to what the select board would like to do, which is to have a very non-controversial meeting.
Yep.
So that's, the research would show that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
I think I said at the Selectmen Forum, the Select Board Forum the other night, you can provide childcare, and we've done that in the past, and we did a lunch before town meeting, which was organized by volunteers. And I suggested maybe we need a 50-50 raffle where you have to be present in order to claim the prize, and we'd do that as the last article on the warning. But if you're really interested in increasing attendance, it's to have a controversial topic.
Yeah.
And we had, you know, I think the probably the largest attendance in my my memory, even before I was moderator, was when we adopted the local option tax.
Right.
And that was a special town meeting where we turned out over 1,000 voters. So
It was 1999, if I recall correctly. Right?
98, I think.
98. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an exciting one. I also recall the one, I think it was in 2005, with the wind turbine question on Mount
Right.
Equinox was another
Right.
well-attended event. But yeah, it's not every year that you want to have one of those controversial questions. You know, another thought, kind of along that line, I've been wondering about. You know, since the arrival of the COVID pandemic and a lot of meetings going on Zoom, or now a lot of select board meetings and other town board meetings being on Zoom. It's a very short step, it would seem, to maybe have town meeting on Zoom, and probably it already is. But people who are watching on Zoom can only sort of watch, right? They can only attend.
Correct.
They can't vote. Do you think it would ever be possible to have people able to vote who are, you know, attending from their living rooms or wherever, or is that just too fraught with too many problems and issues that it doesn't make that workable?
Well, there would certainly be concerns about the security of the vote. How do we know that the people on the other end are registered voters? That's one issue. I think it would lead to, you know, having the equivalent of whatever the electronic equivalent of a paper ballot would be on almost every issue, because how is the moderator supposed to judge whether there's a majority in favor or not? It's not like listening to all the people in the meeting and having the ability for anyone to request a division like we have now. So fortunately, that's not a decision I will have to make. The legislature
Right.
could consider that, and I think they have considered it, but I don't think the technology is there yet for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, well, it would be interesting to see if more folks did, quote unquote, attend, if they could also vote as well. But you're right. I mean, it'd be very hard to be certain that the person who you're seeing on the screen is the actual same
Right.
individual.
Right, and it is hard as the moderator to listen to a vote and determine whether it's 50% or not. It's almost impossible to listen to a closely contested vote and determine whether it's a 2/3 majority.
Oh, yeah. Right, right. Yeah, you know, people, you know, on screens, you know, they'd be part of that.
But even if they're in the room, it's
Yeah.
hard to do that.
Yeah.
So put them out remotely elsewhere. I did hear, I try to go to the Vermont League of Cities and Towns has a town meeting update every year for moderators to try to get you in the spirit of what's happening and discuss latest problems. And I do remember that in Williston, when they were adopting a local option sales tax, which was a pretty big deal in Williston, they didn't have a building big enough to hold everybody. So they had them in 2 separate buildings.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine the problems of trying to determine the vote there.
Whoa, yeah.
Calling back and forth.
That would be complicated.
Yeah. Or recognizing who should speak next.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess there's always one thing or another coming along in terms of process. I also wondered, meetings are conducted through Robert's Rules of Orders. But Has there ever been a time when like Robert's Rules of Order was in conflict with like state law, the state constitution?
There are several times, and that's one of the things that gets reviewed at these moderator, I call it moderator camp, kind of like going to deer camp, see
Right.
the same guys every year, or gals. And yeah, there are provisions, and the state law supersedes Robert's rules in those cases. It's like things like a reconsideration, or how many people are necessary to request a paper ballot. That's a matter of state law. And then we always get in the situation of when you come up against one of those questions and someone moves to suspend the rules. Well, you can suspend Robert's rules, but you can't suspend state law. So that's kind of a pitfall for a moderator to watch out for.
You got a lot on your plate there when you're standing up in front of the meeting saying,
Yeah, intense, as I said, but
Yeah.
only one day a year, so.
well, that's good. Well, so before we have to run, I just had one last question
Yeah.
I wanted to ask. And you're also running for a post on the select board as well
That's
as
right.
the moderator seat. And I guess I just wondered, you know, kind of if you're successful in both races and you win the moderator post, and then we should probably note that this would be for the moderator for town meeting in 2026, right? 'Cause
Correct.
you'll be moderating the one this year, having been elected last year. I mean, would you sit on with the select board, or would you be moderating the meeting? How would that work out?
Well, that's, as you pointed out, I'm running for re-election as moderator for next year. I'm running for the select board for this year.
Right.
It was suggested in a letter to the editor that that was a conflict of interest. It isn't a conflict of interest. It's a question of impartiality. A conflict of interest is if I have some pecuniary interest that's different than the town's interest as a whole, that's a conflict of interest. And if I didn't have a conflict as a select board member, then I wouldn't have a conflict as the moderator either. But someone could perhaps claim that I'm not being impartial in that I've already disclosed what my position is by my vote as a select board member, and therefore that question is now before the voters, and can I be impartial?
Okay.
So first off, you know, I would say that this is all a hypothetical. I'm not assured that I will be elected to the select board, and I don't presume that either. Shortly after reading this letter to the editor, I was watching a PBS show on Thomas Jefferson, and there was a quote that I found very interesting. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were seatmates in the Continental Congress and then became fierce opponents later on. And after both had served as president, they then renewed their friendship again. And there was quite a correspondence back and forth between the two of them. And this is the quote that I heard the other night, which I thought was very appropriate here. How much pain they have cost us, the evils which have never happened. And that was Jefferson writing to Adams in 1816. So one thing I have learned as moderator is never jump to a conclusion until the situation presents itself. Most people would think of that as we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And I guess that's the position I would take here.
All right.
But I think most people have observed me in the last 25 years, and I have never had a complaint as to my impartiality as moderator. So not to say that this might not trigger new ones, and that's a possibility. More importantly, I have a year to think about it before I get there. So
Plenty of time to figure
Yeah.
that one out. All right. Well, Mike, thanks again for making the time to come
Okay.
down and share your views about the moderator post and what's involved in it, and take us behind the scenes of all of that, because I'm sure a lot of people never really kind of go past, oh, there's someone up there saying, who wants to second this motion or whatever. But
Right.
anyway, and so the voting, I guess, is already underway as we're talking here
It is.
on the
It is.
18th. People can already cast ballots, or they can wait until Tuesday, March 4th, when the Australian ballots are open there at the polls at the town hall.
And
plus,
they, without any change of the law or any special measures, they should be sure to come out on March 1st
right,
for our town meeting and listen to their neighbors and gather the collective wisdom.
which will be at 1 o'clock that Saturday at the
Elementary, middle
Manchester
school.
Elementary Middle School gym. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Or I guess you can also watch it on GNAT too.
That's true. But you can't vote on
But you
GNAT.
can't vote. Right. Not as much fun.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks again, and thanks to all of you. Well, we'll see you again later on. Take care.